Okay, so now this is going to be part two of dividing polynomials. Now in part one, if you recall, we were dividing a polynomial by a monomial, and that's where we separate into different fractions. Now in this case, we're dividing a polynomial by a polynomial. In this case, we are going to have to use long division. Okay, long division. And so when we do long division, remember that if I have something like 18 divided by 7, so that's going to be 7 into 18. And remember the 18, if you recall from the previous lesson, the 18 is called the dividend, the 7 is called the divisor. And so when you did that long division, you would say, how many groups of 17 will go into 18? And so you would say something like 2. Now, once you did 2, remember what you did. You said 2 times 7 is 14. Once you put the 14, remember the next step was to subtract this. So you subtracted whatever you put right here. In this case, I'm subtracting 14. And so 18 subtract 14 is 4. And so your answer would be 2 plus 4 sevenths. That would be your answer. So remember, this is your remainder. So you wrote your answer as 2 plus 4 sevenths. Okay? Which can also be written as 2 and 4 sevenths, just like this. Alright, so remember, this is called your divisor. This is called the dividend. This is called the quotient. And this is called the remainder. And when you wrote it, you'd write it as the quotient plus the remainder. And you would write the remainder as a fractional part of this. So you'd write the remainder as 4 sevenths. Okay? Alright, so that's the idea we're going to use. So remember, you say 7 to 18 is 2. 2 times 7 is 14. Then you subtract this. So 18 subtract this is 4. That's your remainder. Since 4 is less than the divisor, you stop. And so you write your answer as 2 and 4 sevenths. Okay? Alright, now, a couple of things you got to make sure. When you rewrite when you do long division, your dividend and your divisor, make sure that it is in descending order. Remember, descending order means to go from largest exponent to your smallest. And then also make sure that if there are any missing terms, that you're going to represent it as a zero term, and that's going to be in the next lesson. And you're going to do that. This second note is to be used as a placeholder. Okay? Alright, so let's look at some examples. Alright, number 1. So again, the directions will say perform the indicated operation. Indicated operation. Or it could say divide. Alright, so number 1. Let's suppose we had this. Suppose we had x squared minus 9x minus 10 divided by x plus 1. So notice that this is no longer a monomial. If this was a monomial, you would say x over the monomial minus 9x over the monomial minus 10 over the monomial, and then simplify each of those fractions. But this is not a monomial, so you don't want to do that. So when you have a polynomial divided by a polynomial, you're going to use long division. So you're going to do this. First of all, you're going to write it as the divisor divided into the dividend. And then also be aware of our descending order. This is in descending order. I'm going from x to the first power to the constant. I'm going from x to the second, x to the first, and then the constant. Okay? And in this case, there's no missing term. You have an x squared term, you have an x term, you have a constant. You have the x term, you have a constant. Okay? All right, now, once you're writing this form, listen to the steps. You're going to remember what we just did. We said 7 to 18 is 2. 2 times 7 is 14. Then you subtract, and you get, in this case, you got your remainder right away. Okay? So listen, you're going to use that idea with this, so listen carefully. All right, so you're going to first take the first term here, divide it into the first term. So first into first. So in your mind, you're saying this, and so that goes back to our previous lesson when we talked about we talked about, if I can find it, when we talked about this. So we talked about performing things mentally. Remember that? So you can use this idea here. So simplifying mentally. Divide like bases, subtract exponents. Okay? Same thing here. This was done mentally. This was done mentally. Okay? All right. So first into first. Remember that. First into first. So basically you're saying this, and think about it. You're saying x into x squared. That's what you're saying. So what's x squared divided by x? Well, x squared divided by x, when you divide like bases, subtract exponents, that's just x. So x into x squared is x. Now align your like terms. See how this was just x? So put the x here. So under the, you're aligning the x's. So this is the x squared column, this is your x column, this is your constant column. So again, remember, first into first. First divide into first. So x divided into x squared. X divided into x squared. It's just x. Okay, now remember what we did. Once we found that 7 goes in 18 2 times, then we said 2 times 7. Alright, so listen carefully to this part. You're going to say x times, well, let me go back and do this. So we said the 2 times the divisor. So 2 times my divisor, 2 times 7, my divisor is 7. 2 times 7 is 14. Here, though, my divisor is x plus 1, so I'm going to say x times x plus 1. So you can take x, you multiply by every term, okay? Every term. So you're going to say x times x is x squared. X times a positive 1 is a positive x. All right, so x times x is x squared. X times 1 is x. All right, now, once we put the 14 there, remember we subtracted. That was the next thing we did. We subtracted. Okay, so listen carefully. This I'm going to have to use colored marker here. Okay, so now we're subtracting this thing. So put that in parentheses. You're subtracting every term. So listen to what I'm about to say. X squared subtract x squared. So x squared subtract itself is 0. And that's what you always want to happen. So as you go through this, you're going to notice that you want this to be 0. You want those to cancel out. Now, a negative 9x subtract x. So a negative 9x subtract x. You're saying this, negative 9x subtract x. That's what you're saying. So a negative 9 and negative 1 is a negative 10x. So use your calculator if you need to. So now I'll get this. I get this right here being a negative 10x. Now you bring down the next number. So minus 10. And now you go through the process all over again. So you can say first into first. All right, so you did this process. Now you can do another process. So you did this. You did this little piece. You're going to do another little piece. You're going to keep going. So let's kind of review as we go. So we said x and x squared. X and x squared is x. Then we said x times the divisor. So x times x is x squared. X times 1 is x. And then I'm going to subtract. So x squared subtract x squared. Those always have to cancel out. Make sure it does. And then a negative 9x subtract x. So negative 9x subtract x is a negative 10x. And then you bring down your next term. And then you do the process all over again. So you're going to say first into first. First into first. So you're saying x into negative 10x. So remember the previous lesson. So x into negative 10x. The x's divide out here. You're just left with negative 10. Okay, negative 10. So that goes here, minus 10. So x into negative 10x is a negative 10. Now we're going to take that negative 10 that we just put, we're going to multiply by the divisor. So negative 10 times x is a negative 10x. Negative 10 times 1 is a negative 10. And now remember, the next part is to subtract. Just like we did here, we subtract. So put that in parentheses. Okay, now listen carefully. A negative 10 subtract a negative 10 means negative 10 plus 10. So a negative 10 subtract a negative 10. Think about that. Negative 10 subtract negative 10 is negative 10 plus 10, which is 0. And that's what you wanted. You wanted this to become 0. A negative 10 subtract a negative 10. Same thing here. Negative 10 subtract a negative 10 is negative 10 plus 10. Use your calculator. Negative 10 subtract negative 10 gives you 0. So don't make it difficult. So that's 0 as well. So that means my remainder is 0. And so the answer then will be your quotient. And since the remainder is 0, you're done. This is your answer, x minus 10. Okay, so this right here, in the blank, you're going to put x minus 10. Which is going to put in the blank. Okay? All right, so we can go through another one. Okay, here's number 2. Number 2. All right, suppose you had this. Suppose you had x cubed minus 16x minus 6x squared plus 63 divided by x minus 7. So x cubed minus 16x minus 6x squared plus 63 divided by x minus 7. So again, you got to make sure that your numerator and denominator, in this case the divisor and the dividend, are in descending order. So in this case it's not, so I got to rewrite this. So I'm going to rewrite it as x cubed minus 6x squared minus 16x plus 63 divided by x minus 7. All right, now I'm going to do long division. So you're going to say x minus 7 divided into x cubed minus 6x squared minus 16x plus 63. Now again, notice there are no missing terms. I have an x cubed, I have an x squared, I have an x, I have a constant. I have an x, I have a constant. So no missing terms. All right, and then we do the long division. So let's remember what we said. We said first into first. So we said x into x cubed. If you got to write it, you write it out. So in a divide-like basis, subtract exponents, so that becomes x squared. I'll put this x squared in the x squared column, so we'll put that here. So first into first, so x into x cubed is x squared, so I put x squared here. Then I take that x squared and multiply by my divisor. So x squared times x is x cubed. So always make sure that if you're doing this correctly, notice in both parts, these were the same. These were the same. Okay, they need to be so they can cancel out. So these are the same. Okay, so x squared times a negative 7 is a negative 14x squared. Now always make sure you're aligned. See how they're aligned? X cubed, x squared. They're aligned. All right, now what you're going to do is subtract. Subtract all of this. So basically the sign changes. So if you think about it, the sign's going to change. So really this is going to be so when you distribute the negative 3 here, this is a negative and this becomes a positive. Okay? That's a negative, that's a positive. So that's what really it becomes if you think about it. But if you want to do this little part I'm about to do, that's fine as well. So you're saying x squared subtract x cubed. I'm sorry, x cubed subtract x cubed. X cubed subtract x cubed is 0, and that's what you wanted. You wanted that to be a 0. Now over here, though, I'm saying a negative 6x squared. So I'm just looking at the coefficient for right now. A negative 6 subtract a negative 14. Just really what you're saying. You're saying negative 6 subtract a negative 14. But that really becomes negative 6 plus 14. And you could just put that in your calculator as negative 6 subtract a negative 14. And then you would get, what's that, 8? You would get 8. And that's what this is. You're saying, you see this right here, this plus symbol? This plus symbol right here? That's this. So negative 6 plus 14. Right. So this is going to be the little challenging part for you, but use your calculator. Negative 6 subtract a negative 14. On your calculator, you're going to get 8. So what that means is this. A negative 6x squared subtract a negative 14x squared is an 8x squared. And then you bring down the next term. So minus 16x. Keep bringing down the next term. And then you do the process all over again. So x divided into 8x squared. First into first. So now we're going to go through this process. So you're saying x divided into 8x squared. Well, x squared divided by x is just x. So that becomes 8x. So I'm going to put, that's positive 8x. So I'm going to say plus 8x. And notice I'm aligning my like terms. All the x's in one column. Then again, you take that 8x and you multiply it by your divisor. So 8x times x is 8x squared. Notice they're the same. So that way, in the next part, when you subtract, they're going to cancel out. 8x times a negative 7 is a negative 56x. Okay? And now you're going to subtract. You're going to subtract. So you're saying 8 subtract 8. So 8x squared subtract 8x squared, that's 0. Remember how, see how when you do this, that first column in each group cancel out? Now over here, use your calculator. A negative 16 subtract a negative 56. So in your calculator, when you do a negative 16 on your calculator, negative 16 subtract a negative 56, you get, again, I did this calculator wrong, so you should get, let's see, you should get a positive 40. All right, because this really becomes negative 16 plus 56. That's what really this becomes. So you get 40. So this right here, a negative 16x subtract a negative 56x is a positive 40x. And then you bring down the next term. So it'll be plus 63. And then you do the process all over again. See how you have these little groups? So now we're in the third group. So first into first. So x into 40x. So x into 40x is just 40. So I'm going to say plus 40 here. And then you do the process all over again. 40 times your divisor. So you had your little first group. First times the divisor gives you this first group. 8x times your divisor gives you the second group, and so on. So 40 times x gives you 40x. And remember, these terms have to be the same. 40 times a negative 7. 40 times 7 should be 280, so negative 280. All right, and then you subtract. Okay, and so 40x subtract 40x, that's 0. A positive 63 subtract a negative 280. All right, negative 280, so it becomes 63 plus 280, which is 343. So it becomes a positive 343. Now, notice you stop here because, remember, this is a constant. All right, the degree, remember, let's talk about degrees. So remember, the degree of your divisor is 1, because that, remember when you're talking about the degree of a polynomial, you look at each term and determine the degree of each term, and then the degree of the polynomial would be the largest one. So the degree here is 1, the degree here is 0, so the degree here is 1. Here, the degree of a constant 0. Once a degree of your remainder is less than the degree of your divisor, you stop. So the degree here is 0. The degree here is 1. I stopped. So now that's your remainder. So the answer, let me put that here. So the answer is going to be your quotient, x squared plus 8x plus 40, plus the remainder written as a fraction. So 343 plus 343 divided by the divisor, which is x minus 7. All right, so that's the answer. Okay. All right, so that was number 2. Let's look at number 3. Number 3. All right, suppose we had negative 9x cubed plus 86x squared minus 46x plus 9 divided by x minus 9. All right, so it's already in descending order. There are no missing terms anywhere, so I'm going to do the long division. X minus 9 divided into negative 9x cubed plus 86x squared minus 46x plus 9. Okay, so we're going to say first into first. So in your mind, you're saying x into negative 9x cubed. So negative 9x cubed divided by x. Remember, you divide like base, subtract exponents. 3 subtract this exponent 1 is 2. So it becomes negative 9x squared. So you can put negative 9x squared in the x squared column. So negative 9x squared. And now you're going to multiply this times your divisor. Negative 9x squared times x is a negative 9x cubed. Remember, this and this had to be the same, so that when we subtract them, they cancel out. Negative 9x squared times a negative 9 is a positive 81x squared, because a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay? All right, now, look what you're going to do. You're now going to subtract this. Okay? So, on your calculator, think about it, you're saying negative 9 subtract a negative 9. Negative 9 subtract a negative 9. In your mind, mathematically, this really means negative 9 plus 9. But if you didn't see that, then use your calculator. Say negative 9 subtract a negative 9, and you get 0. And that's what happens here. You wanted the 0. Over here, though, that's a positive 86. Subtract a positive 81. And so 86 subtract 81 is 5. So that becomes 5x squared. So 86x squared subtract an 81x squared is a 5x squared. Okay? Now bring down the next term. So minus 46x. And then you do the process all over again. Now in the second group. First into first. So you're saying x into 5x squared. So x into 5x squared is just 5x. So that goes here, plus 5x. And now you're going to say 5x times all of this. So 5x times x is 5x squared. 5x times a negative 9 is a negative 45x. And now you're going to subtract. You'll subtract this polynomial from this one. So 5x squared subtract 5x squared is 0. All right, over here we have a negative 46x, so I'm just put the coefficient. Negative 46 subtract a negative 45. And that becomes negative 46 plus 45, which is just a negative 1. So that becomes a negative x. So a negative 46x subtract a negative 45x is a negative x. And then bring down the next term. So now we do it all over again. So now we're in the third group, x into negative x. So x into negative x, that's what you're asking. So x into negative x is just a negative 1. And so we put negative 1 here. And now we say negative 1 times your divisor. Negative 1 times x is a negative x, and that's what you want. You want these to be the same, so that way when you subtract, they cancel out. And then a negative 1 times a negative 9 is a positive 9. And so now I'm going to subtract. And I'm going to get negative x subtract a negative x is 0. A positive 9 subtract 9 is 0, so I get a remainder of 0. So the answer right here, you're going to say the answer is going to be, since the remainder is 0, is just this quotient right here. So it's just 9x squared plus 5x minus 1. That's your answer. All right, now let's look at the next one. All right, number 4. Okay, so we have x squared minus 7x minus 11 divided by x minus 8. All right, so the both the dividend and divisor are in descending order. There are no missing terms, so I'm going to do the long division. Say x minus 8 into x squared minus 7x minus 11. All right, now let's do the division. First into first. So x into x squared is just x. So I'm going to put the x in the x column, so that goes here. And then you multiply. X times x is x squared. x times a negative 8 is a negative 8x. All right, now you subtract, and you subtract just like this. You're subtracting all of this from this part here. So x squared subtract x squared, that's 0. That's what you want. Remember, you always want these two to cancel out. Notice the process, the pattern. Cancels out, cancels out, cancels out. Okay? A negative, now right here you have a negative 7 subtract a negative 8. Use your calculator, write in, just type it in just as you see it. Negative 7 subtract a negative 8. But really this is saying negative 7 plus 8, which is just 1. So if you had used your calculator and you said negative 7 subtract negative 8 and press enter, you should have gotten 1. Alright, so that means is this. Negative 7x subtracting negative 8x is a positive x. That's what it is, 1x or just x. And we're in the next term, minus 11. Alright, so then you do the process all over again. First into first. So x into x, that's what you're saying. X into x is 1. So it becomes plus 1. And then you do the multiplication all over again. 1 times x is x. 1 times a negative 8 is a negative 8. See how I'm lining it like terms? And then you subtract. You subtract. So x subtract x is 0. A negative 11 subtract a negative 8. Negative 11 subtract a negative 8 becomes negative 11 plus 8. Now again, you use your calculator, you see it, negative 11 subtract negative 8. When you press enter, you should get negative 3. Now notice this divides, the degree here is 1. It's a constant. Degree of a constant is 1. I'm sorry. The degree here is 0. Degree of a constant 0. The degree of this divisor is 1, so you stop. The degree of your remainder is less than the degree of your divisor. You're done. So now the answer, though, here's what you're going to write. Since the remainder is not 0 like the other one, you're going to say equals x plus 1, the quotient, plus the remainder, negative 3, divided by the divisor, x minus 8. We prefer, though, to write it like this. X plus 1 minus 3 divided by x minus 8. That's how we prefer to write it. All right? Okay, so that's number 4. All right, number 5. Suppose you had 2x squared minus 38 minus 17x divided by 2x plus 3. So 2x squared minus 38 minus 17x over 2x plus 3. All right, again, we got to put this in descending order, the numerator here. So that's going to be 2x squared minus 17x minus 38 divided by 2x plus 3. And now let's do long division. So 2x plus 3 divided into 2x squared minus 17x minus 38. Okay, so we're going to say first into first. So we're saying 2x divided into 2x squared. So that's just going to be x. So I'm going to put the x here in the x column. Then I multiply. X times 2x squared is, x times 2x is 2x squared. That's what you want. You want these to be the same. X times 3 is 3x. Okay? Now you subtract. So you're saying 2 subtract 2 is 0, so that cancels out. Alright, over here you have this. You have a negative 17 subtract a 3. So a negative 17 subtract a 3 in your calculator, you should get negative 20. But what that means is this. A negative 17x subtract a 3x is a negative 20x. And then you bring down your next term. And so you do the process over again in this group. So you're going to say 2x into negative 20x. 2x and negative 20x is just a negative 10. And so that's going to go here. And now you do the multiplication over again. A negative 10 times 2x is a negative 20x. Remember, that's what you wanted. You want these to be the same. So when you subtract them, they're going to cancel out. A negative 10 times 3 is a negative 30. And now you're going to subtract these. So Negative 20 subtract negative 20 becomes 0. All right, let's figure out what this is. A negative 38 subtract a negative 30. Use your calculator as you see it. You type in as you see it. This really becomes to a negative 38 plus 30, which is a negative 8. So this is negative 8. And so the degree here, the degree of a constant 0, the degree of this divisor, x to the first, is 1, so you stop. The degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor. So the answer then here, would then be x minus 10 minus 8 divided by 2x plus 3. Okay, that's your answer. So the remainder, remember, it's the remainder divided by the divisor. That's what this says. So it's your quotient plus the remainder divided by the divisor. All right, number 6. All right, suppose you had 6x squared plus x minus 7 divided by 2x minus 1. All right, so it's already in descending order in both cases, so let's just go ahead and do that long division. All right, so I have the divisor divided to the dividend, so we do first and the first. So 2x into 6x squared. Mentally, when we do this mentally, that's just 6 divided by 2 is 3, and so that's just 3x. So I'm put the 3x here, just 3x, positive 3x. All right, and then to multiply. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. Remember, that's what you wanted. You want these to be the same. 3x times a negative 1 is a negative 3x. And then I subtract. So I'm subtracting this from these. So 6x subtract negative 6x is 0. X subtract, let's just do the coefficient. Coefficient here is 1. So 1 subtract a negative 3 is 1 plus 3, which is 4. So if you use your calculator and you say 1 subtract a negative 3, you should have gotten 4. And so, but really what you have here, though, is a 1x subtract a negative 3x is a 4x. And then bring down the next term, minus 7. And then you do the process all over again. So 2x into 4x is just 2. So that goes here, plus 2. And then you multiply all over again. 2 times 2x is 4x, and that's what you wanted. You wanted these to be the same so that when you subtract, they're going to cancel out. 2x times a negative 1 is a negative 2. All right, and now you're going to subtract. And so 4x subtract 4x is 0. A negative 7 subtract a negative 2 on your calculator. Just type in as you see it. But really this becomes negative 7 plus 2, which is a negative 5. And now remember your remainder, the degree of your remainder is now less than the degree of your divisor, so you stop. So the answer then will be the quotient, 3x plus 2, plus a remainder, which is a negative 5, divided by the divisor, which is 2x minus 1. Okay? All right, so that was part 2 of dividing polynomials.